So I'm here at Earthaven Ecovillage near Asheville, North Carolina. I last visited this community in 2001 when I came down with some other Twin Oakers for an FIC Arctic Community Conference. I was this fresh-faced 20-year-old communitarian, and that was my first substantial point of contact with the FIC, visiting a community that at the time was only 7 years old. I remember it as being one of the first examples I'd seen of a community that was based on permaculture design and with a strong commitment to natural building. And now here I am 18 years later. I'm the executive director of the FIC, and Earthaven is now this 25-year-old community that's really become a village. It's also just emerged from an 8-year process of restructuring legally and has come up with some really interesting creative solutions involving a homeowners association, neighborhoods organized as housing cooperatives, and a non-exempt non-profit corporation, which you can read about in an article by Diana Leaf Christian in the new issue of Communities magazine on community land. Diana lives here. And it's really amazing to see this community having matured over the last 18 years.
I got involved in intentional communities in the late 60s. Early 70s is more accurate. And helped start a commune in upstate New York in 1970, in the era of communes. Mm-hmm. And I believe in, it suits me, and I believe in that kind of lifestyle when people are just a together thing, a tribe thing, in this challenging and chaotic world. It's very nourishing and encouraging. So I've just done community all my life. And so when I came up here to visit, the Earthaven story was coming to life. It had been brewing for several years, and now it had come to a solidifying position. And my friends thought, well, I'm the perfect person to get involved. I had been a publisher. I had published a statewide networking magazine in Florida for 5-6 years or so, and they felt like I had the ability to help it happen, so they were very encouraging to me to get involved. And I was excited. Wow, look at this. All these people who had the original Earthaven people were mostly people in their 40s who had some spiritual community background. They'd lived, there was some Zen folks, there was some Sufi folks, there was us from the Osho community, there were people with more of a shamanistic connection. So it really was it was a miracle that we started this community, you know, because we didn't all know each other that well or whatever, but it was just like one of those things. So it was the natural outcome of my whole adult life, or kid life, because my feeling is, well, didn't I grow up in community? It wasn't an intentional community, except that everybody who was living there seemed to be intending to live there. You know, I just grew up in Brooklyn, New York, in a low-rise community. There weren't any really super tall buildings or anything, and it was a working class place where it felt safe, and everybody seemed to know us because my dad had a store. So I think I always felt like I was in this big community. Some people were Christian, and some people were Jewish, and some people were black, but we were all one big thing. So it felt good, so it made sense to keep looking for that. But it was about that identification with that unsatisfied longing, you know, kind of thing, which we all have anyway, because we're all wanderers on this planet at this point. And a lot of my study and reading these days keeps coming up about how we are meant to be tribal. That's how we learn how to be safe on the planet. And the possibility of really being safe anyway is such a huge leap from our evolutionary, cellular, brain-oriented needs, from what I can understand. I never thought I'd be in a cold climate in the mountains because it's not my thing. I grew up by the ocean. But this exciting project with my closest friends was going on, and so I took advantage of that. Was more important than location.
What would you say the story of Earthaven was when it was getting started?
The desire to combine instinctual and experiential awareness of the oneness of everything beyond the way our minds are conditioned, a desire to develop more and more awareness and lifestyle honoring that, at the same time that we return to nature. We do this in a land-based situation, that those two can't be separated really, that you really can't do it in a city. You know, even though it's where a lot has to be done because that's where people are. What we wanted to do would have been really impossible there. You know, it's like, how much can we stretch out and let nature, or whatever words you want to use, life, guide us? You know, so a lot of our early designing even was done through journeying and imagination, the way we were willing to trust the information we were getting that wasn't verifiable in any way. You know? But we had a hum among us, a lot of trust and excitement, and a sense of, I don't know what you'd call it, almost like wonder, like how do we get so lucky to find each other and come upon this decent piece of property that we could maybe do this with, and have enough intelligence and guidance and resources to actually own it. Because, you know, that's a big thing for us, is like we paid off this property through some intelligent design at the beginning of how to do it in a very short period of time. And our feeling was, once we own the land, anything's possible. Until we own the land, it's all if. So we learned, we surprised ourselves. Unfortunately, you could say the consequence of that was all the money went into paying the land, and we didn't build enough infrastructure. Or we didn't build as much infrastructure as we sometimes lamented that we hadn't done, and still haven't done.
So I'm going to ask the two sides of this question. You know, so 25 years later, how do you feel like Earthaven has fulfilled the sort of original intention? And then the other side, of course, being, how do you feel like it has diverged or has not fulfilled?
Yeah, I say it's too soon to say anything really cohesive about that whole story. I can respond and say that the mission is still alive and well. It's been reworded. And then the current thing you'll find on our website, and that's in the council hall, of our mission, vision, and these main goals, they're really the same. They're just articulated more specifically now than they were at the time. And they're still alive. Those goals are all really still alive. So nothing that we've done has made those goals impossible, from what I can tell. So, but we're just in the maybe it's not infancy, but 25 is not a good comparison to a human being's life. We're just adolescent here.
Where do you see Earthaven going at this point?
I think what we really want to do is develop our neighborhoods, figure out how to help people develop their neighborhoods. I have some encouraged feelings about where we are also potentially headed in terms of our spirit or the soul of Earthaven. Maybe 10 or 12 people or more, younger people who have been here 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 years waiting to become members, or thinking about it and then deciding to become members, are just like boom, 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 becoming members now, ready to do it. And they really, it's great in the sense that they really know how the community operates because they've been here so long. It's exciting that they can really take over the administration of the community. This is the most euphoric thing for me. Since restructuring allowed them to become members, and they're actually doing it, and they actually understand, and they're actually holding the line at some principles that could have been lost. And every time this occurs in a meeting or I hear about it, it's just almost a wonder. It's like, wow, they really are quality people. They really do get what we were trying to do here. They are expressing what I would have hoped, or many of us at the beginning would have hoped, would be the goals of, or the underpinnings of why we do what we do. I think the economic thing is a much bigger feature than we considered in the beginning. We knew that it was important, but we really just said people will work it out for themselves and stuff like that. And that's kind of what's happening, but it's a big challenge. I mean, I would have loved if the spiritual, aesthetic underpinnings of our original dream team were the dominant things, but I understand that there's a conflict between that and the size of what we set out to do. I think a smaller group could control what it was becoming much better than something that says, but we're going to grow to be 120, 160 people. Like, oh yeah? And they're all going to work together just the way you have in mind, right? This is human beings in America. I think one of the things that needs to be built here that is in the original idea that hasn't been much of a focus is the whole bioregional thing. We never said we were going to produce everything we needed. We always understood that we need to be connected enough in the broader field so that the intelligent human exchange systems can happen. And it's richer, it's better, it's wiser.
Anything else that you want to share with the world about your life here at Earthaven, or about what you think Earthaven means to the world?
I don't think I can go there, but something that I thought of talking about that I think is very valuable here is the embrace, because of certain people who've played a strong role, the embrace of NVC at Earthaven, in the sense that everyone has to take an extended class so that they know it, which means they're held somewhat responsible, even if it takes a long time before you actually can incorporate that in a fluid, natural way. And in the last few years, a gradual acceptance that the restorative circles model is something that we need and can use and do use, that teaches us what we haven't understood about human communities and how things evolve in their more balanced way, not just like the left brain decides that we got a problem and we're going to solve it, but it's much more complex and needs lots of time to evolve. And that gives me a lot of encouragement that, wow, those are very important things. And that is a kind of leftover, or not a leftover, but an evolution of some of our early concerns. We tried a lot of different things that didn't quite gel with this community. Eventually, Steve wound up becoming an enthusiast and a trained person in NVC, and it works really well for the kind of people that are at Earthaven. It's not required for restorative circles, but it really helps. We have this long-standing thing in Asheville called Building Bridges that some of us were part of when we lived in town, that people are going now to, where they actually get this focalized, facilitated, intercultural conversation on a variety of topics over a series of time, and people are doing that. So I think the time has come, maybe psychically as well as individually, for white folks to feel responsible, ready to enthusiastically take on the legacy of racism as best they can.
I lived in the Vale for 17 years, so I moved there in 2000 and left in 2017. the Vale is a very conservative community, and by that I mean that change is slow, that like many Quaker meetings, it takes a long time for, Earthaven by comparison is like a group of teenagers, and I mean that in the best of sense, in that it's a place of much change, where change is welcome. The meeting process in the Vale was very much a reflection of Quaker meeting style. Consensus is not about agreement, it's not about consent, it's about not getting in the way of God's will. And that's my interpretation, because I'm not a Quaker. So over time in the Vale went from almost completely Quaker to mostly not Quaker. And the meaning of consensus began to shift in that, as a lead facilitator, I noticed that some members thought consensus meant agreement, and some members thought consensus had a lot more to do with, I'm actually forgetting the term, the Quaker term, but there's this term that was actually in the original founding documents. Instead of the word consensus, they said this other word. And it was so subtly different. And I really began to see how, personally, I began to have my belief in consensus beat out of me. Because I began to see how consensus was a process that led people who had a lot of passion, a lot of energy, to spend that passion and energy on words and meetings and not to move very fast. And in terms of a community that's well established, that's actually in some ways a good thing. Because then change is very slow and things are working, and you're not messing up the system, and new people aren't overturning apple carts. But there were also moments where it's like, we have to get this done, and a member is standing in the way and it's not working. Sense of the meeting is the word. The Quakers speak of sense of the meeting. And as I explored being a facilitator of consensus, I began to see how much some of the membership of the Vale were speaking from a sense of the meeting, and some of the membership were talking about, do I agree? And some of the membership were horse trading, which is a whole different category. It doesn't really belong in a consensus process at all. And that's part of like being in community, is that no one's perfect and everyone's living their lives, and not everybody is actually completely present all the time. And some people are retired and have more time to be at meetings, and some people are working full time and have no time to go to meetings at all. And the Vale met for an hour and a half, except for special meetings, every month. Total meeting time. And the Vale has no shared spaces. So there's no meeting hall, there's no shared kitchen, there's no shared meals. And so there was a conversation for a while, are we a neighborhood or are we a community? And it's okay if we're a neighborhood, but let's start acting like it. And then some people are like, no, we value community, so we're going to have, we have potlucks. And we started organizing soup suppers, so we take turns cooking in different people's houses. But it's not as woven in as some other places. But in other ways, it's lasted much longer because people are slightly separate. So there's sort of a strength in standing on your own and standing together. And one of the things I'm getting is the conservativeness of consensus-based decision making creates a stability in the system if you get the system up and running. And with the Vale, I know that it was a very slow build. They had a very small. At first, Billy and Dick Eastman, when they arrived in '48 to start the initial, okay, we're going to do this together with the Morgans. That was the first 2 houses in the land, and then the next house was 1950s. But the interesting thing for me is, I wasn't satisfied. This is so much more what I want in terms of being shared kitchen and co-housing. I'm not in a separate unit. I'm a New Yorker. I love this sort of apartment dwelling. I love the work party. We had work parties in the Vale every once in a while. It was on a regular schedule. There's no LEAP requirements. The fees were necessary, but they weren't as much as here. It wasn't as much going on. So there is some satisfaction coming there. But I also think there's some risk, because this is a very changeable place. It's changing, and that change brings a little bit of risk with it. The Vale was much more settled. You know, there are many projects here of development going on. The Vale was much smaller. So the Vale is basically the size of one of the neighborhoods of Earthaven. I mean, to me, Earthaven is a place that's going to become one of the hottest, like, intentional community places in the country, because you're not going to have one intentional community. You're going to have 6 or 7 or 8 intentional communities all in one place, and each of them doing it slightly differently. And that's really interesting. So you could come here from anywhere in the country and see this governance model or that governance model or this. It's going to be really fascinating. Now, right now, we're all using very similar governance models, but as time goes on, people are going to start to evolve different directions.
It's great to me to see how Earthaven seems to have managed to stay in touch with and maintain a continuity of its sense of purpose that's engendered a really strong level of caring and participation. And with some of the new legal structures now in place, they're more able to start bringing on new members and developing new neighborhoods. One of the things I'm most struck by seeing this community again after 18 years is how much more relaxed they seem around their idealism. They don't seem to hold their ideals any less strongly, but there's a flexibility that they've matured into that has allowed them to adjust things to suit the circumstances. And as they settle down after some big changes, they seem ready for a whole new chapter. I'm excited to see where they are in another 18 years.